Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glendavid Books. Amidst the confusion, chaos and cacophony of Indian politics, there's a question that's rarely asked, and even when it is, it's often not honestly answered. What sort of country are we becoming? That's the key issue I shall explore today, and my guest is the Booker Prize-winning author and essayist, and someone many people consider a voice of conscience, Arundhati Roy. Arundhati Roy, I want to start with the question you first raised in an essay you wrote in 2009, but the truth is, if anything, it's even more pertinent today. You asked, what have we done to democracy? What have we turned it into? What happens when it has been hollowed out and emptied of meaning? What happens when each of its institutions has metastasized into something dangerous? Would you answer your question with reference to Modi's India?
2009 is, 13 years ago? So, obviously, clearly some of us were worrying about this before Modi came to power, Right now, what can I say? I mean, there's been a revolution. Modi's favorite industrialist has overtaken his second most favorite industrialist as the richest man in India. I think Adani's wealth is 88 billion and Ambani's is only 87 billion. Adani's $51 billion came in the last year when most of India was falling into poverty and hunger and joblessness. So, I'm just giving you a slightly elaborate answer to your question, So these rails, which are inevitably to diverge, were set in place before Modi came to power. You already had, at the time I was writing that, I think 100 individuals who owned 25% of the GDP and so on. Modi came and pressed the accelerator, for big business. Way back in 2009, and that's, before the after the Gujarat massacre, after those people, Muslim people were slaughtered on the streets of Gujarat, you had Ratan Tata and Ambani endorsing Modi as a future prime minister. So now what has happened, we've read the Oxfam reports on inequality. It's become absolutely obscene. I think a farmer in UP recently put it perfectly. He said, देश को 4 लोग चलाते हैं, 2 बेचते हैं, 2 खरीदते हैं, चारों गुजरात से है. So you have these people who own ports and mines and petrochemicals and the media and the internet and so on, and that kind of monopoly capital, I don't think even capitalist countries practice. So in Parliament recently, you had Rahul Gandhi speaking, talking about Amir Hindustan and Garib Hindustan, rich India, poor India. And you had OAC talking about Mohabbat ke Hindustan or Nafrat ke Hindustan. And it was as if these were antagonistic things, but actually they've been dancing together a long time because the corporate class underwrites Hindu nationalism. It is the bank guarantee, So they and now they've come together on the 56-inch ka chhati of Modi. So if the institutions of democracy were being eroded even at the time when the UPA was in power, eroded by massive influx of corporate capital, you had a situation where, let's say we were heading towards, let's call it the best democracy that money can buy. Now you have, democracy for people who can afford it. But now you have these institutions of democracy, whether it's, the press, whether it's the courts, whether it's the intelligence services, worryingly even the army, all educational institutions penetrated, overtaken, or at least compromised by this Hindu nationalist ideology. You have Parliament turned into, monkey bath. I mean it in the Hindi sense of the word, where you have clearly unconstitutional laws, like let's say the abrogation of Section 370 or what were the other ones? The farm laws, laws that totally, and of course the Citizenship Amendment Act, laws that devastate the lives of millions of people. And you have the Supreme Court, basically, you know, they've been implemented. The Supreme Court is still pondering over whether it's constitutional or not. Then you have the office of the Prime Minister being abused by the Prime Minister, coming out and making these announcements of demonetization, which devastated the economy, the announcement of a lockdown with 4 hours notice, the announcement of the withdrawal of the farm laws, which was as insulting as the promulgation of the farm laws. You know, just toying with the idea of what a democracy is meant to mean. So finally, I'll just finish. What I feel has happened is that the BJP has now begun, and its leader has begun to confuse itself with the nation and with the state. So if the BJP is rich, the nation is rich. If you criticize the BJP, you're anti-national. This is a very dangerous thing, you know. So yeah, I mean, sorry for the long answer, but.
So are you saying that democracy has ceased to exist, that it's been diminished, that it is eroded? Which of the three?
I'm saying it has been seriously eroded, and the shells of these institutions have been kept in place, you know, but we are in danger of just becoming, you know, the show window is democracy, and behind
So India's claim to be the biggest democracy in the world is seriously questioned by you?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I want very much to touch on some of the aspects of the sort of country we've become. First, in December in Hardwar, there were blood-curdling calls for a genocide of Muslims, for ethnic cleansing, and there was deafening silence from the government. Not the Prime Minister, not a single minister, not a single MP in the BJP had anything to say. In your eyes, is that a sign that India is moving away from its constitutional commitment to secularism and instead becoming a majoritarian Hindu country?
See, those Dharam Sansads, there have been several of them, you know, and they were calling for, literally calling for genocide, calling for Hindus to arm themselves. We've also had, you know, hundreds of attacks on Christians, on churches, the burning of statues of Jesus. Now, the person who was one of the main movers and one of the main speakers in this, Yati Narasimhan, he's just been given bail by the courts. So it's not just the government, but the courts, the state machinery, which is part of this. While, you know, professors and activists and lawyers and poets are in jail, a man who calls openly for genocide has got bail. You have other instances, you know, like you look at the hijab, you know, controversy in Karnataka now. Again, the courts have come out temporarily maybe, but in favor of the Hindu majoritarianism, as we call it, which is a problematic term. We'll come to that. But if it's not all right for Muslim girls to wear hijabs in classrooms, debatable. How is it all right for the Prime Minister and the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh to prance around in saffron robes in their positions holding office? You know, so what we have is a system where we are a country with a pretty sophisticated jurisprudence, pretty sophisticated laws, but now those laws apply depending on your caste, depending on your religion, depending on your gender, depending on your ethnicity, and this is like, you know, having a huge, I don't know, like a huge spreading tree resting on a bed of sand. I mean, to ask whether we are becoming a majoritarian state, this is the stated position of the RSS. Mohan Bhagwat said it was non-negotiable that India is a Hindu state. Modi is a member of the RSS. Of course, he's rowing us in that direction.
So we've stopped being secular.
No, the problem is that this idea of a Hindu majority is problematic because since the 19th century, they have been trying to construct this political Hindu majority, starting with Jat Pat, Todak Mandal and Arya Samaj. Later on, the RSS came, you know. Hindu is a very diverse community, a community divided into castes which are often antagonistic to each other. So the process of trying to create this so-called majority is a very violent one, and it will fail. You know, it has
but
to
you're
fail.
not answering my question. Are we becoming a Hindu majoritarian
Yes,
state? Have
we
we
are.
ceased to be secular?
Well, this government is rowing us in that direction. That's where it wants to go.
This government
And
doesn't want India to be secular. It wants
obviously,
it to be a Hindu
it's
state.
not a secret. I mean, they keep announcing that, you know.
In your Jonathan Shell Memorial lecture, you wrote, and I'm going to quote, "The conceit of secularism, hypocritical though it may be, is the only shard of coherence that makes India possible. That hypocrisy was the best thing we had. Without it, India will end." What do you mean by that phrase, India will end?
I mean that in the sense that Yugoslavia ended. I mean that in the
break up?
sense that the Soviet Union ended.
Break up.
Yes, because India is a social contract between a number of religions, a number of castes, a number of ethnicities, speakers of 780 languages. It's a social contract. Now, this vision of a Hindu nation, one language, one religion, one country, it's like trying to distill, let's say, like trying to distill an ocean and fit it into a Bisleri bottle. It is a process of extreme violence. So what Modi and his men are doing right now is literally like going around the country, laying a fuse attached to strips of dynamite. You know, it'll all blow up if they continue this pressure. Everything that is beautiful about this country is being turned into acid.
So just so the audience are clear, you're saying India is an ocean that comprises many different aspects, people, cultures, religions, ethnicities, and to try and pour it all into a Bisleri bottle is what the attempt to make India a Hindu country is like.
Yes.
You are converting an ocean into a Bisleri bottle, which is why the country will break up.
Yes.
You
Eventually, in time, yes.
You really are predicting the Balkanization of India.
I've been reading about the Balkans, and it gives me the shivers, you know, because you are seeing a process of violence that is being laid out. You're seeing something huge and diverse being shrunk and hardened. It will blow apart, you know.
How soon? How soon? Do you have a timeline in mind?
I don't know, but already you heard what this man Yogi Adityanath said, कि Uttar Pradesh, Kerala or Bengal or Kashmir banega. Like, you know, let's just keep you in this terrible ditch of no health care, no education, no money, no jobs. We'll throw a few scraps at you, but don't become like Kerala. You know, it's got hospitals, it's got schools, it's got literacy. It's a very, very dangerous situation.
Another aspect of the sort of country we're becoming is the way we treat Muslims and the way we treat Dalits. In your Penn Arthur Miller Freedom to Write lecture, you say, and I'm quoting you, "Over the last 5 years, India has distinguished itself as a lynching nation. Muslims and Dalits have been publicly flogged and beaten to death by vigilante Hindu mobs in broad daylight, and the lynch videos then gleefully uploaded to YouTube." Are we becoming a brutal country? Or maybe more accurately, I should ask, are we being brutalized by our government?
See, we have always been a brutal country. You know, we're not becoming, we have always been a brutal country. There has not been a day when the Indian army, since independence, when the Indian army has not been, let's say, deployed against its own people, whether it's in the northeast, whether it's in Kashmir, Hyderabad, you know. Also, any country that practices caste in the way we do is a brutal country, because that is a brutal hierarchy that can only be kept in place by the permanent threat of violence and the, let's say, the frequent demonstration of violence. social, sexual, psychological. You've seen it in Hathras, in Kailanji, or day after day after day. So, and that violence is a social violence that is happening while the government, I mean, let's say political parties are actually trying to woo the Dalit vote. But when it comes to Muslims, when it comes to Christians, the rape, the massacres, the lynching, the killing, if you're involved in it, there's a good chance that you will be inducted into the BJP, you'll be garlanded, you'll be made a minister, you, God knows, you know, one day you'll make it to prime minister, to home minister, you know, anything could happen. And inside this communal polarization, Karan, I think one very important thing we have to remember is, you know, like Amit Shah went to Kairana and made that comment about हम लोग तो 3 साल से मुगल से लड़ रहे हैं, you know, and using Mughals as a euphemism for Muslims. This continuous sort of portrayal of Muslims as the descendants of conquerors, of Christians as some agents of the West. In truth, the fact is, caste is wrapped up in this, you know, because millions of Indians converted to Islam, converted to Christianity, converted to Sikhism, to escape the oppression of caste, you know. So these are victims of the Hindu caste system that are now being portrayed as the descendants of conquerors.
But what is the point you're making?
The point I'm making is that the brutality, the polarization, all of it is wrapped up in the social structure of this country. And it's not just the government, you know, creating a situation. It is also society that has practiced brutality. And the point I'm making is that the Hindu
But
Muslim,
is the government encouraging the brutal side of our historical character?
Of course it is. It's not just encouraging, it's igniting, it's exploiting, it's working the fault
So the government
lines.
is also brutalizing us?
Of course it is. I mean, that is not even in question. You know?
Against this background, I want to come to what I suppose is the key issue I want to ask you. Has India become a fascist state? In the introduction to your book, Azadi, you write, and again I'm quoting you, the infrastructure of fascism is staring us in the face, and yet we hesitate to call it by its name. What are the signs of fascism that you see around us? What are the signs that are staring us in the face that we won't recognize and call by its name?
Okay. So I was expecting the fascism question to come. So what I have done, I have written down a list of what are accepted to be signs of fascism, not just in India, but generally. I'm going to read it out, and you're going to tick the box, or our audience is going to tick the box and see if you recognize, okay, any of these signs. Because it's a loose word, people throw it around. So I did this little bit of homework, because I predicted this question. Okay. 1. A deep social crisis which is seen as a threat to existing social hierarchies. That is the beginning, okay? So we had the Mandal Commission report come out. We had the fear of now the, you know, the coming of reservations for the OBCs. We had the anti-Mandal protests. And you had the rise of the new caste parties, Mayawati's party, Lalu Yadav, Mulayam Yadav, okay, 1. 2, a longing for some mythic national past, fantasizing about a super pure racial superman and restoration of national vitality. Recognize it? Okay. A society that believes Brahmins are Bhudevas just has to make a lateral shuffle, okay, in this one. A mass movement with the support of some sectors of the national ruling class, Advani's Rath Yatra, which comes up, and simultaneously the movement to demolish the Babri Masjid, and simultaneously the Indian market opens, and privatization comes in, which is going to now mitigate the whole business of reservation, which has become a huge issue now in the UP elections. The emergence of a single dominant authoritarian party, the fabrication of internal or external threat to the nation, often racial, religious, or ethnic in form, an attack by an authoritarian state on the working class, and an attempt to suppress any challenge to capitalism from below. The foreclosure of democratic or autonomous means of expression, the existence of street fighting elements, militias to intimidate, terrorize, and in some cases murder oppositional forces. Read RSS militia, Bajrang Dal, VHP, all of that. A militarized rhetoric of masculinity, anti-feminism, casteism, racism in the case of Europe and America, xenophobia.
How much more on that list?
Paranoia.
Can I put, Susan, the audience
Yes.
listening to you,
Yeah.
at least some of them may say, that's just a list of nonsense.
Is it?
And I tell you what they'll say. They'll say there are many countries that hark back to a glorious past. Britain does that all the time. There are many
I'm not
countries
talking
that have
about-
dominant single-party governments and a weak opposition. That happens in several countries and democracies. You've just put together a list of things and claimed it's fascism.
No, come on. I'm not talking about a glorious historical past. I'm talking about a glorious mythical past. I'm talking about the idea of the superman, like the super race, like the German Nazis had Aryans, you know. I'm talking about militias, like does Britain have Bajrang Dal and RSS militias, and are they massacring people on the streets? Are they organizing Muzaffarnagar and Gujarat and so on?
I tell you why it's hard to believe that we've become a fascist state.
No, I'm
Because
not
we have a
saying-
government that buckles under pressure from farmers. We have a press that is sharply critical, at least from some quarters of the government. We have elections where the government is defeated. Modi may win regularly at the national level, but often at the state level he loses. We have a court and a judge that often checks the government. What they've done over Pegasus is one example. Is it really fascism?
I'm not saying that we have a fascist state. I'm saying that the people in power are intrinsically fascist and leading us in that direction.
Modi is intrinsically fascist.
Yes, and so is the RSS.
And the BJP as a whole?
Yes, the RSS ideologues have openly, as we all know, admired Mussolini, admired Hitler, called Muslims the equivalent of the Jews of Germany, all of that. We know all that, you know. We know the declaration of the idea that they want to declare India a Hindu nation. We know the experiments with eugenics. I don't believe, frankly, that I believe that they are losing their grip. I don't believe that they will be able to succeed. But I believe that this is a tunnel that we have to go through, and eventually the people of this country will make it a failed experiment.
But let me just
But we
understand
need
for the
to-
audience. You're not saying we have become a fascist state. Are you saying we're in the process of becoming one?
We are in the process of becoming one, and I would say, like, even 2 years ago, we were very much in danger of that experiment being more successful than it appears to be now, you know.
What's changed?
Huge protests, the farmers' protest. If you look at what's going on in UP now.
So
you
India
have-
is fighting back.
Yes,
The people
yes.
are fighting
people,
back.
The people are fighting
So I'm
back,
just
not
to be clear,
political parties.
you're saying two slightly contradictory things. We're in the process of becoming a fascist state. 2 years ago, it looked as if we were more likely to become one than it does today. What's changed today is that the people are fighting back. The farmers in particular are fighting
No,
back.
also the people who rose up against the NRC.
But that
you
was
know.
2 years ago.
Yeah, but this piece that I wrote was before that, you know, before those protests began.
So what is the situation today? Is
I
today
would
India
say-
on the way to becoming a fascist state?
I would say that you know, that ideology has somehow saturated. If you look at what's happening,
What does that mean?
It means that in places like UP and the farmers' protests, they have sort of realized somehow that they were being played. You know, they were very much part.
But now you're saying that
Yeah.
the threat of becoming a fascist state is receding.
I think so.
It's receding.
I think
So
so.
the situation is improving.
I think so. I would say so.
So what you wrote in the Jonathan Shell lecture isn't quite as true today as it was when you wrote it a year and a half ago.
But I think that part of the thing is people, writers, protesters, activists, journalists, all of us
are responding to this.
are recognized it, spoke about it. People listened. People thought about what had happened. If you look at
So,
the conversation,
just to sum up for the audience,
we promise you
what
not
then
to
is the nature of the danger we face today? Are we still in danger of becoming a fascist
I'll
state?
tell you what I feel is the danger. Sorry, did I do something to that? Anyway, I think that what is dangerous is that we have an election machinery that is sort of compromised. We do have a very scattered and disparate opposition, because I think in one way federalism is coming up, and
But
there
you're
is
not
no-
answering my question.
one
Are
sec.
we in danger
I am
of becoming
answering.
fascist?
Just hang on. So what I'm saying is that that Hindutva card has played itself out now. But the danger is, like, say, in a place like UP. I don't know what's going to happen in the election, but let's say the BJP loses the election. I think there will be great danger then, because unless you have a strong...
You're saying the BJP's defeat in UP will resurrect the danger of fascism?
No. I'm saying when the BJP, if the BJP, let's say, loses the election in UP, it will go back to the business of trying to engineer violence along communal lines. And unless you have a government that can actually control that strongly, you might have
But hang on a second, the BJP lost Rajasthan, it didn't do that. It lost Madhya Pradesh, it didn't do that. They lost Chhattisgarh, they didn't do it. They've lost lots of state elections under Modi.
But UP is UP is very, very important for them.
So actually you're saying that the prospect of a BJP defeat is more worrying for you.
It's not more worrying. It's not more worrying. It's not more worrying. I'm just saying that whoever comes to power next, in case they lose, will have to be very vigilant to make sure that that polarization is not allowed to happen.
But what I don't understand is the confusion that has emerged suddenly. When I asked you, are we in danger of becoming a fascist state? You said 2 years ago the danger was greater. Since then, people are fighting back. You said the danger has receded. But now you're saying a BJP defeat, which should actually, most people say, bury the danger, actually will resurrect it.
It won't resurrect the danger, but it will, I think there will be a huge attempt to resurrect it. And that people have to be on guard about.
In other words, a defeated BJP is more dangerous. A defeated BJP is more dangerous for India than a victorious BJP.
No. But a defeated BJP, let's say in UP, could try and create the kind of turbulence that it created.
But that's what I'm saying. A defeated BJP is more dangerous.
Just cool off. What I'm saying is that a defeated BJP, let's say in 2022 UP, will see 2 years to the 2024 election coming, 2 years in which it does not have the responsibility of government and is free to create chaos. And therefore, whatever government comes and the people involved will have to be very vigilant to not let that happen.
And that's when the danger of fascism becomes stronger.
Yes, because it's not like you can throw a switch and it's over. This has... वो तो खून में उतर गया, you have to
in your
be
Trinity
careful.
College Cambridge Clark lecture, you raised two particular concerns about fascism. I want to put them to you one by one. First, you said, as India embraces majoritarian Hindu nationalism, which is a polite term for fascism, many liberals and even communists continue to be squeamish about using that term. Are you saying that liberals and communists, who traditionally and ideally should be standing up and fighting back, are actually in denial?
Well, communists, yes, they should have been standing up and fighting back. Liberals have historically been, wishy-washy on many things. But yes, I'd say that denial is a polite word, because...
What is a more appropriate word?
Well, collaboration, collusion. I mean, there were many people, liberals who are intelligent and good people, who even after they knew what happened, let's say in Gujarat, they knew about the daylight massacres, the killings, the use of state machinery, the rhetoric, when Modi became Prime Minister, there was a sort of euphoria. He was welcomed. But now, a lot of them have taken very brave positions at cost to themselves, and I admire that, you know.
So they're no
I
longer
admire that.
squeamish.
Lots of them are not squeamish
So again,
now.
this is an opinion that is slightly different to the point when you wrote it.
Yeah, I mean,
although you only
it's
wrote
not,
it about 18, 19 months ago.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that there was a sort of red carpet rolled out. It was hard for people like me to understand then.
But today you believe
But
liberals
today,
are actually standing up.
Some are, yes, of course they are.
So the denial is not so strong today as it was, say,
Yeah.
18, 19 months ago.
No, and even I'm talking about, you know, the denial that led to a situation in which Modi could come to power and be applauded and
The second
celebrated.
concern you raised, and in some senses it may be a more important concern because it may chime with the audience more greatly, is the question, when does fascism become fascism? You wrote, and I'm quoting, the division in opinions on the use of the term comes down to whether you believe that fascism became fascism only after a continent was destroyed and millions of people were exterminated in gas chambers. You're referring there to what happened in Germany. Or whether you believe that fascism is an ideology that led to those crimes, that can lead to those crimes, and that those who subscribe to it are fascists. In other words, what you're saying there is that the ideology that leads to fascism already exists in India. And you're also hinting, aren't you, that if we don't act fast, those horrible crimes that happened in Germany could inexorably happen in India too.
Well, I think the crimes have begun, you know, in some ways, not like the crimes of Germany, but, you know, the demonization, the otherization of the Muslim community. You saw that sort of genocidal language during the Corona lockdown where Tablighi Jamaat was blamed for, you know, spreading typhus. Muslims were spitting on fruit and spreading Corona, just like the Nazis blamed the Jews for spreading typhus. But then you had something like the National Register of Citizens and the Citizenship Amendment Act, where, you know, again, like the Nuremberg laws of 1935, citizens were expected to produce legacy papers which would be approved by the state, which would then grant you citizenship. Now, this sort of, like Hannah Arendt said, you know, citizenship is the right to have rights. So when you shake that ground under people's feet, it's a terrible thing to do, regardless of who is on the list and who is off the list. You have detention centers already being built in places like Assam and many other places. Of course, the millions of people who are already off the NRC cannot be accommodated in those detention camps. But it's somehow the idea in the national psyche that this is where you belong, you know. But I don't believe that the kind of massacres and killings that happened in Europe can happen in India. Because, as I said, I believe that given the history of this country, how the RSS came to be...
But haven't you contradicted yourself? You began your answer by saying those crimes are already happening, and then you listed some of them, and now you're saying the opposite. You don't think they can happen.
Karan, you're really being ridiculous sometimes. I'm saying not on the scale that happened in Europe, and that won't happen. Because,
why?
Because I believe that given the history of Hindu nationalism in India, which started long ago, we did have to go through this tunnel, and we will come out of it. The country would have paid a price for it, but fascism will be a failed experiment in this country. This is what I'm just saying, this is what I feel.
Is this something you're certain of, or something you're hoping will be the outcome?
This is something I feel as a person who lives in this country, who travels, who speaks to people, who has their eyes and ears open, who is listening to what, if you go and listen to what people are saying in villages and towns, in places like UP, where, you know, in the last election you had this huge blinding saffron wave.
Can I interrupt?
where
What you're
people
saying
are-
is that the Indian people who you know are not communal. They will not turn upon brothers regardless of the fact those brothers are Muslim, Christian or whatever. And at the end of the day, the attempt by governments or RSS or whoever to try and communalize, to try and make this fascist will be resisted by the fact that the Indian people are not like that.
I believe that there will always be a rump of people that are like that, but I don't think that they will ultimately prevail in creating the kind of mayhem that happened in Europe.
I have to say, and I think this may be true of the audience, that I'm now a little confused. Is there a danger, and a real one, of India becoming fascist under the RSS, BJP and Modi, or is that going to be a failed attempt and therefore not a real danger because the Indian people are not going to be victims, are not going to fall into that trap, are going to fight back? Because if the latter is true, that the Indian people are not communal, then the danger is not a big danger. It will be a failed attempt.
Things change, Karan. Things change. So you're like looking at things as if they're always fixed, you know. Things change, a river flows. We have been through something terrible. My own feeling is we are not out of danger because we do not have a very robust opposition, but I feel that
People will save us.
People are coming to understand that somehow they fell into this way of thinking, but now they're falling out of it because they have suffered greatly
So
under
we're
it.
climbing out of the hole.
I think
We're still
so.
in the hole, but we're climbing
Yes,
out of it.
I think it's a slippery slope. It's still dangerous, but I do think that Modi's star is falling. I do think so. It may not be this election, may not be the next election, but I don't think that this country is going to go down the way Europe did.
There's one more point about fascism which you make in your Clark lecture, which I think is very relevant to the situation in India today. It's the relationship between fascism, fake news, and falsified history. You write, and I'm quoting you, fake news is the skeletal structure, the scaffolding over which the specious rot that fuels fascism drapes itself. The foundation on which that scaffolding rests is fake history, possibly the oldest form of fake news. In other words, fake news and fake history are integral both to the emergence and the growth of fascism.
Well, that's not some new theory of mine. People know that about fascism. But, you know, history is today like current affairs. You know, so what you have is mythology being turned into history, history being turned into mythology, decimated by WhatsApp University, by TV serials, by movies. You know, it's like some kind of cheap course that is intravenously, administered. But the more important thing is that the absurdity of that history sort of hides another more problematic story, which is a story more sophisticated and told about the history of India, but a history that elides the stories of women, the stories of other genders, other sexualities, the stories of caste, the stories of Ambedkar, Phule, Savitribai Phule, Birsa Munda, Ayyankali.
What's the point? There's loads of examples. What's the point?
So my point is that there is a sort of master narrative, that with all these other narratives intersecting. So in the story of history as current affairs, you know, caste is an engine that runs our society. So today, UP elections are happening. Everyone is a scholar on caste, on the minute caste vote banks. But otherwise, we don't talk about it. Or you can talk about...
But I'm slightly lost. What's the point?
My point is that there is other kinds of fake news, not just the Hindutva fake news. You know, so you have, for example, you have a society where you may talk about Dalits who make up the entire sanitation workforce, who are dying in manholes. But caste is not just about oppression, okay? It's also
But
about
let's not get into
entitlement.
caste. Let's
Why
stick to
not?
fake news.
No. One sec. Hold on.
But no, the
You
point
must
you're
get into
answering
caste.
is the relationship between fake news, false history, and fascism. That's what I want you to explain. Is that a particular danger at the moment?
Fake news is not just about fake facts. Fake news is about a fake narrative. So I'm saying that we have a narrative where, like, you don't want to talk about caste. I want to talk about it. I want to say, let's look at the politicians, Modi, he hates dynastic politics, okay. But aren't the big industrialists dynasts? So why don't you ask about the caste of the judges in this country? Why don't we ask, what is the caste of these 100 people who own half the wealth of this country? They all come from a particular background.
But that's not the question I asked you.
It is. It's important to understand that the elite media does not want to ask these questions.
No, but the question that I asked was about the relationship between fake news, fascism, and false history, and how that is particularly a pertinent point to make about India today, where we have an awful lot of fake news.
This is a kind of fake news, Karan, that you are eliding the kind of entitlement of a society that is almost like apartheid, you know, where a very we can laugh about the mythology and the fake news of the Hindu right, but there is another more sophisticated narrative which is equally problematic.
In other words, a lot of what we believe is news, a lot of what we want to talk about is actually fake. Either it's just a lie, or it's a refusal to recognize.
Yeah, or it's a project of unseeing, a refusal to recognize, which is a sort of fakery in itself.
That's what I said.
Yes.
Either it's an outright lie, or it's a refusal to recognize and see.
Yes.
There's one last aspect of Modi's India that I want to raise with you, and it's by no means unconnected to the fascism we're talking about. It's Kashmir. Again, in your Jonathan Shell Memorial Lecture, you say of the Kashmiri people, and I'm quoting, "Why should they want to be part of India? For what earthly reason? If freedom is what they want, freedom is what they should have." Can you explain that further?
Yeah, well, Kashmir is, Kashmir is a valley covered in graveyards, you know. But first of all, we can't lay the horrors of what has happened over the last 30 years in Kashmir at Modi's door. It started way before he was ever there. But now, with the abrogation of Section 370, it has entered another sphere. But the story of Kashmir, the story of those mass disappearances, the story of the summary executions, the story of, the horrors that have been visited upon those people has been kept from the Indian public, because the story of Kashmir is mediated through a very bigoted nationalist media. I actually believe that if many Indians really knew what was going on, they would think differently. But that is why Kashmir is the valley from which no news must come. That is why Kashmiri journalists have been silenced, are being arrested, are being threatened. That is why Khurram Parvez, one of the most wonderful, bright human beings that I know, whose organization has documented in chilling detail what has happened, is in jail now, So I really feel that, this thing that you quote, I wrote after the abrogation of Section 370, when tens of thousands of Kashmiris were in jail, including, by the way, pro-India chief ministers, because now you can't just be pro-India, you have to be pro-BJP, including journalists, activists. Thousands were in jail, the internet was cut, the phones were down, the valleys sewn up in barbed wire. And from that vast prison, they are looking at what India is doing with Muslims here. While their land is occupied, while their history is being erased, if you were in their position, what would you think of? What would you want? What would you dream of? What would you desire?
You're saying they dream of freedom.
Yes.
And you're saying if they want it, they should have it.
Yes.
Do you think the separation of Kashmir from the rest of India would be the best thing for them?
I think that it's not in my place in truth, to say what Kashmiris want. But I think there should be a mechanism where it's not just about what India wants and Pakistan wants, but what Kashmiris want. And I think there can be a new imagination if you want to solve the problem, but you don't. You want to retain
and that new imagination
problem.
emerges from the acceptance that they want freedom, they have a right to it, let them have it.
I think we don't need to put words into their mouths, right? Instead of silencing them, we should let them speak.
And hear what they are saying and grant what they want.
Yes.
And that's freedom.
Again, let them say it, no? Why don't you ask them and let them, why should me and you be deciding what they want?
You also make a very, I would say, disturbing comment about the relationship between Kashmir and the rest of India. You write, Kashmir may not defeat India, but it will consume India. And one of the characters from your book, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, Musa Yazvi, says something very similar. He says, one day Kashmir will make India self-destruct in the same way. I presume in the same way as India is making Kashmir self-destruct. You're not just destroying us, he says, you are constructing us. It's yourselves that you are destroying. In other words, the bell that tolls in Kashmir is actually tolling for the rest of India as well.
So Musa is one of the characters in my novel, and he's talking to a person called Biplab Dasgupta, who's a very brilliant, actually, but jaded intelligence officer. So what he's saying is that when you steal oxygen from the air, you're left with carbon dioxide, a sort of different kind of carbon footprint, if you like, which he's talking about the moral corrosion of digesting what is being done in our names in Kashmir. But there's also a kind of institutional corrosion, It's like, for example, there's 500,000 soldiers, I think, in Kashmir, manning, patrolling a place where, by their own admission, there are like just a handful of militants. So the real enemy is the people. As Doval said, civil society is the new frontier. Just like Amit Shah said when he was changing the UAPA and said that, individuals and writers and people like that are more dangerous than terrorists. Now, you have that army, a fighting army, converted into a kind of bloated administrative force, almost like doing police work, which is very dangerous and destructive for an army. Then after that, you have a situation where, you have, of course, you have we spoke of the press being silenced in Kashmir. You saw in the papers, I think yesterday it was, where Indian journalists are going to lose their accreditation if they are anti-national, which again means anti-BJP. And now look at the army after those irresponsible remarks that Amit Shah made in Parliament, poking the Chinese dragon in the eye. You have a situation where the army is strung across two frontiers. Soldiers, hundreds of thousands of soldiers have to operate at altitudes of -30, -40. They may not be fighting China, but they're already fighting a war against the elements.
So you're saying the way in which...
No, just to keep that army in place, even if there's no war, in a country which is falling into poverty, into hunger. It is just, that's a kind of, let's say, a very stupid way of causing, triggering a kind of stretching of resources.
If I understand correctly, what you're saying is the way in which we are compromising our constitutional commitments, values, principles, our democracy by the treatment of Kashmir, which, as you say, goes back 30, 40 years, well before Mr. Modi came to power. But that process of undermining our values in Kashmir will soon begin to affect the same values in the mainland.
Yes,
it will soon affect the way we behave, the way we treat ourselves, the way we treat our democracy, our journalists, our activists, our freedom fighters in the rest of India.
You're seeing it very clearly already, you know.
This is what you mean when you say Kashmir may not defeat India, but it will consume India.
It is consuming India, corroding us, you know.
This is what you mean when you say you're not destroying us, you're constructing us because we're making them bold and strong to demand their freedom. But on the other hand, you're destroying yourself.
That is what Musa is saying, because, you know, it's incredible.
But Musa, I take it, is voicing a thought that the author shares.
Well, that is another huge debate, Karan, of literature.
No, because it echoes what you wrote in the Jonathan Shell lecture. Kashmir may not defeat India, it will consume India. Musa saying the same thing.
Yeah, it is true. But when you read what Biplab Dasgupta says, then you'll say that is also what the author thinks, which is true, because literary authors
so let me
and
end then very
novel
quickly,
writers
because
are
we've
mad.
been over a whole gamut of issues, and the audience will want a little bit of clarity. Are you worried about the future of India? Or actually, do you see signs? Because you agreed that we're in a hole, but we're climbing out. And when you're climbing out of a hole, the picture is getting better. So is it getting better? Is it improving? Or is it deeply depressing and worrying?
Well, I think it depends on what view you take. You know, right now...
what view do you take? Give me your
No, what
view.
I'm saying is right now when you think about it from day to day, from week to week, when you're watching people you know being arrested, silenced, beaten up, all of that, it's extremely depressing. But I do feel when I, you know, climb a tree and look out that it will end. You know, it will end.
The present is bad, the future will be better.
And the people will end it. And that is the only way it will end. Because one or two people, one politician, some new great leader won't end it. The people will end it.
So your faith is actually in the Indian people.
Yes.
The Indian people will continue their commitment to secularism, to fraternity, to treating each other properly, to living amicably, no matter how much they're tempted or led astray by governments of the day.
You've put a lot of words in my mouth. I'm not saying all that. I don't think Indian people are beautiful, wonderful people who love each other and hug each other. They'll continue to have these problems. Indian people also did fall into fascism. They also did behave in terrible ways. But I think they are realizing now that it is at their own cost.
So they're self-correcting.
So I think they will self-correct. But we still have lots of things that we'll have to self-correct about.
Arundhati Roy, thank you very much for this comprehensive answer to the question I began with, what sort of country are we becoming?
You're welcome.
It's a bleak picture that you paint of the present, but there is that little bit of redeeming light, because you say we are beginning the process of climbing out. The Indian people will save us. Thank you very much indeed.
Welcome.